Shelley Fabre on the nation's greatest oldie station right here, WVLT, cruising 92.1. I'm your rock and roll bad boy, Chris Randazzo. In the house with me is Joe Cook, and on the line with me is the one, the only, Mark Lindsay of Paul Revere and the Raiders fame. How you doing, Mark?
I'm hungry for those good things, baby.
Oh.
I'm cool. I'm fine. I'm cruising with you.
All right, my friend. So how have things been lately? I hear you're back out on the road and you're doing a show right here in our backyard.
That's true. The 18th was, I think, is just about a week from yesterday. We're going to be at the, it's the Dennis Flyer Theater, of course, at the Camden County College. And I'll be there with a band of incredible musicians, and we're going to be playing all the Paul Revere and the Raider hits.
Oh, great.
All the Mark Lindsay hits, including Arizona and stuff like that. Indian Reservation, Kicks, Hungry, Just Like Me, Good Thing. The list goes on. There's more than I can tell you right now in a short period of time.
There's so many, and in just 1 year, your band put out 3 gold records in one solid year back in, 1966?
Yeah, and we were very, very lucky. We were the first rock and roll group signed to CBS Records, and so we had to show them what we had. And we just kept cranking out the records, and they kept promoting them, and the public kept buying them. And I want to say thank you to all the fans that bought them then and are still listening.
Hey, Mark, it's Joe Cook. It's great to talk with you. I wanted to ask you about you guys when you were first signed with CBS. You actually cut Louie around the same time as the Kingsmen, right?
Well, not about the same time. Within 3 days, we cut it in the same studio. Same studio in Portland, Oregon, same engineer, same microphone, same equipment, same everything, just a slightly different take on the sound.
So what happened? I heard Mitch Miller had something to do with kind of like squashing you guys with that?
Oh, yeah. Well, the record came out in Portland. Their version came out and sold 600 copies in their hometown. Our version came out and sold 6,000 copies. And we were off and running. Wherever we played, up and down the coast, all the way from Oregon down to San Jose, and in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, and parts of Utah, it took off. But as soon as it started getting ready to be played in Los Angeles, Mitch Miller, who was head of A&R for CBS Records, and who hated rock and roll with a passion, said,
I think rock and roll hated his records just as much.
Turnabout fair play. So it was threatening to get played in L.A., and he thought that's the last straw. So he told those promo guys not to push it, and they didn't, and the record died. And then a couple months later, DJ right up on your up in your neck of the woods in Boston, actually, named Arnie Woo Woo Ginsburg, played it as a joke on WMEX. He said, "Man, I've got the worst record you've ever heard, and I'm going to spin it next." And he played it. Of course, it was the Kingsmen's Louie, and the phones lit up like a Christmas tree.
That's funny.
And the fact that nobody could understand the words, and then it got banned in Boston, that was all it took for teenagers to know it was a cool tune, and they had to have it.
That's something else. I once had a radio personality tell me, sometimes hits is mistakes. Mistakes is hits, boy.
That's true. Well, Arnie didn't know that. I mean, he called that one wrong, but that's okay. The Kingsmen got the hit record. We got the television show Where the Action Is, and the long career, and everybody who's living happily ever after.
What was that like doing that TV show?
Oh, it was incredible. We did it 5 days a week for 3 years, and with all those TV appearances and all the network stuff we did almost 1,000 television appearances, which I guess, excuse me, makes me one of the most televised lead singers in the world. It was fun. It was just really heady stuff.
Oh, that's good stuff.
Did you get to work close with Dick Clark on that?
Excuse me?
Did you get to work close with Dick Clark on that?
Oh, sure. Well, Dick Clark kept his eye on everything. So if you worked with Dick Clark, he worked close.
And you better had worked.
He supervised everything. He watched everything with an eagle eye, and I think he was first on the set and the last person to go home. But
wow.
It was great to work with him. He was very professional, as you know, and he's still in there.
Such great stuff. And Dick Clark was instrumental in pushing so many careers back then, especially before the Internet. I think he was the Internet when it came to music back then.
As a matter of fact, that show, Where the Action Is, was kind of a precursor to MTV.
Right.
When MTV hit in the 80s, if you had a hit record, you had a record and want to make it a hit, you had to do a video and get it on MTV and see what happened.
What was it like appearing on the Ed Sullivan Show?
It was incredible. It was, we were these little kids from Idaho, and here it's Ed Sullivan, and he says, and here they are for the kiddies, Paul Revere and the Raiders.
That's great stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah, it was
so,
amazing.
Are you going to be doing any Raiders songs this time around?
Oh, of course. I mean, I was lucky enough to sing every hit record that Paul Revere and the Raiders ever put out, and some stuff on my own. So we'll be doing all that. I think I might even bring my old saxophone up, because before the Raiders got on TV, I was a singer and a sax player, and we used to play a lot of stuff like, come on, everybody, take a trip with me. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-da. So we'll be playing. I might bring it up and play a couple songs and just blow everybody out of the joint.
Nice.
Good stuff. And my first recollection of Paul Revere and the Raiders, of course, was Indian Reservation. And, I was born in 1965. And by the time I was 10 years old, the major influences in my musical life were, all coming out of the 60s and, of course, the 50s because of my parents. And so I'm musically confused forever as far as age goes.
Good for you. Well, rock and roll never died, and it's amazing. All the people that grew up, the kids that grew up with rock and roll in the 50s and 60s, they refused to let it die. They still love it, and all the next generations, the next two generations that have come along, seem to be picking up on it. So we'll do a show. There'll be 3 generations in the audience, and everybody knows the words, and everybody's liking it. And hey, I'm very, very flattered and very grateful for that.
So when did you what made you decide to finally break away with the Raiders?
Oh, it was just I've been with the Raiders. I started with the Raiders when I was 15 years old. Paul and I started the group, and I handled the music, he handled the business, and we were off and running. And after, in the early 70s, we just been together, about 15 years. It just kind of like, it didn't end with a bang, but just kind of like faded out. And we just decided to, I left and the band broke up for a few years. So I decided to go my own way, and Paul then eventually came back and started doing his thing again. And again, everybody's living happily ever after.
You ever thought about reuniting?
Ball's in Paul's court. People have asked me about it, and they said, would you do it? And I said, well, sure, but, Paul has to want to do it too, so you got to call him up and ask him.
I've been doing this all-request show here on Cruising 92.1 for about 7 years now, and I get requests every weekend for Paul Revere and the Raiders songs every weekend. So, I just had a request for one earlier, and played it for a gentleman up in Sicklerville. He wanted to hear Mr. Sun, Mr. Moon. So
Mr. Sun, Mr. Moon, sure.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the songs I produced and wrote, and of course, right after Barry Mann and Cynthia Wild, who gave us Kicks and Hungry, Terry Melcher, our producer, and myself started writing together, and we had Good Thing and Him or Me and Ups and Downs and a bunch of songs, and then I started doing it myself when Terry moved on, and we've just been very lucky. And of course, you mentioned Indian Reservation. That turned out to be the biggest selling single in the history of CBS Records to that date, and I'm really proud of that.
I think that's one of my favorite songs of all time.
Oh, thank you, man. I produced it, and I'm really proud of it. It was just a lucky thing. I was over my head, but it worked out okay.
Now, that's a really good piece of history there, and tells a very, very long story. And it gets it out in just a few minutes. And I have a little bit of Native American blood in me, and when they brought the song to me, it was actually recorded as a Mark Lindsay single. Wow.
And then later we put it out as the Raiders. But
no kidding.
Jack Gold said, well, I found your follow-up to Arizona at Indian Reservation. And I said, well, I don't know. He said, yeah. And so I took it to Jerry Fuller, my producer, and he was busy on another project. He said, I can't, man. I've got Gary Puckett, and I've got who's the guys that had oh my gosh, it sounded like the Beatles. It was
I think everybody was trying to sound like the Beatles right about then.
Yeah, well, anyway, Jerry was busy on something else, but I can't do it. So CBS, well, we've got to have a record, so why don't you produce it yourself? And I went, well, I'm producing Paul Revere and the Raiders at the time, but I didn't want to produce myself because it's hard to be objective. But I went ahead and tried it, and like I said, I just got lucky, and the rest, I'm glad people like it. And at the time, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee was number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. So I think the timing was right for that song.
Hey, you know
Sure
what?
is.
Speaking of the Beatles, I heard John Lennon was a pretty big fan of you.
Actually, John Lennon had one of our early records on his jukebox. He had Steppin' Out on his jukebox, I found out years later.
Wow.
Yeah, that was cool.
That's all great stuff, isn't it? That's all great stuff. It's funny how those little tidbits come out over the years, and you find out different things.
I am so lucky, guys. I'm so lucky, and you know, I'm out this summer with Happy Together. I was out last year with Happy Together, and the reviews said, "Hey, Mark Lindsay steals the show. He's better now than he was 20 years ago." Well, that cost me plenty for those blurbs.
It's all good stuff.
I'm just grateful. I'm having more fun doing it now, I think, than I ever did, except maybe when I first started when I was 15.
Now, you guys had the very first anti-drug song. Is that correct?
Yeah, but, you know, at the time when we recorded it, it came from Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil wrote it, and it came to Terry Melcher as, you know, they submitted it for Paul Revere and the Raiders. I heard it, Terry played it for us, and said, "Hey, that's great." But I was so naive at the time and so young and dumb, I had no idea that it was an anti-drug song. I thought it just was a song about, hey, it's harder to have fun now than it used to be.
That's great.
Wasn't it until Newsweek called me and said, "Well, Mr. Lindsay, how does it feel to have recorded the first anti-drug song?" I said, "I did."
Uh-oh. Was that a good or bad thing for the 60s?
Oh, you know, it didn't really matter. It was just it was a great record. I think it was in the grooves. I'm not sure. Well, it became a hit, so I guess it wasn't too bad.
That was a great song.
Oh, great song. One of my favorites.
We have one that's been playing behind us. Do you recognize this?
I can't hear it.
It's Like Long Hair.
That goes way back. That was we had it before we got on CBS Records. We actually had a couple records on the charts on a little label called Gardena. They were piano instrumental records, and I think that's where the Kokomo and they got the idea for a fifth to Beethoven and those piano instrumentals, maybe from those records.
Wow. Love it. Well, listen, Mark, want to thank you very much for calling in today for our, during our show. And we've got some tickets we're going to give away for your show. And if you'd like to plug it one more time before we let you go, because we've got to pay the bills here at WVLT. And let people know where you're going to be performing one more time.
Okay, Friday, March 18th, the Dennis Flyer Theater, at Camden County College. I'm going to be there in Blackwood, New Jersey, with a band of incredible musicians. We have keys, drums, bass, and 2 guitars. And everybody in the band sings like a bird, so we sound exactly like the records, if not better.
There you go. There you go. Well, once again, Mark Lindsay of Paul Revere and the Raiders fame, and Joe Cook, thank you for getting Mr. Lindsay on today. And Mr. Lindsay, have a great show. Break a leg, as they say.
Thank you, and I want to say, for everybody out there listening, just keep cruising on 92.1.
Thank you, sir.